Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest Family Business Forum, this time from Yorkshire. Although the world we live in at the moment, you can be anywhere listening to our fabulous speakers. And I know some of you have joined us from as far away as Scotland. So good morning, one and all. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Paul Andrews, the founder and CEO at Family Business United. We would normally be running events around the country, but sadly that's not to be. But in kind of the aim of really continuing to keep the community together, we've brought together a great panel of speakers today. For those of you that don't know, there are 6 million family firms across the UK, of which 1 million are based in Yorkshire, something that I'll talk about a little bit with David Kerfoot a bit later on this morning. And that 7.5% of the total UK family firm population are based in the county, and they employ over 1 million people. So it's a good place to start. I'm delighted today to be joined by David Kerfoot, MBE, Fergus, Bailie and Jason Rockett, all of whom have very different journeys within the family business field and great insights that despite the pandemic and everything that's going on around us, I think it's worth focusing on the family challenges and some of the other challenges and to learn from each other. So really without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. First speaker this morning is David Kerfoot, MBE. In his own words, David describes himself as a BBB, a back bedroom boy, and David and his wife Elizabeth started trading in vegetable oils from a desk and a phone back in 1980 in their back bedroom. It grew significantly, and I know David is a little bit shy sometimes with some of the stories, but at the beginning they blended and packed oils from home, and then it grew to blending and stocking over 800 oils. Before they sold the business back in 2015. But David gives back a lot to the family business community, and it would be really great now, David, if you could just share a little bit more of your story and why you think family firms are so important to Yorkshire.
Thank you very much, Paul, and it's a great privilege to be here this morning and to say a few words about family business. It really is, and the first thing I really want to say about saying, as I've only got 15 minutes to, you want a little bit about the story and then one or two things about the values that I've learned from that story, is that I don't want to come across in any way as the bloke who's done it all and who's rather big-headed. That is far from me. What I do want to come across is try and tell you about my and reflect my passion and commitment to family business and what it has done for my family. Well, my background, when I left Polytechnic with a HND in business studies, because I'm not a very clever person really, I'm not an academic, I haven't got much brain power, but what I've got this Yorkshire grit and determination, which is very special up here. And when I left Polytechnic, I managed to wangle myself a job with a global business called Cargill, who are major processors and traders of vegetable oils, and I had 5.5 very happy years there and learnt a lot about that side of the business. And in fact, my wife always says to everybody that I'm the only man who's, apart from in love with her, in love with the world of veg oils. It's really the only thing that I've ever really known. And had 5.5 happy years there, and then was headhunted to come back to the Republic here to build a veg oil plant. And of course, the lure of coming back to the Republic from the city was too great to turn down. And hence I ended back up in North Yorkshire. And I'm sure you've all had this kind of experience in life where you do something because at the moment you take that decision, you think, wow, that's a really good decision. I'm going to gain a lot from it. Then very, very quickly, and I realized within a month, I'd made a major mistake. Because without going into any details, within 6 months, I'd been sacked for being dishonest. And those of you on the call who know me as an individual, I think would agree with me that I'm not a dishonest kind of guy. So with a large mortgage and other expenses to pay, I decided to become a BBB, a back bedroom boy. Started off with a desk, a telephone, 300 quid in the bank, and started to broke veg oils between the contacts I had. And that was the start of the story. Now, some 5 years ago, someone said to me, it'd be great to write that story into a book. And I duly did. They said, put the story down because you've got lots of good things to tell. And it's a very light-hearted read. It's nothing too heavy. And I want to quote you from the foreword in this little book that I wrote, because I think it sums up the journey that I made. And it goes like this in the foreword. It is a story which pans 3 decades and reflects both joy and heartache. Indeed, the 3 decades can be summed up as follows: youthful enthusiasm, followed by reckless folly, and finally, business acumen. And for anybody who'd be interested in having a copy of this book, do email me. I'll send it out. There's no charge for it, because if I can at least teach somebody a little story or something that would really help them in their business, very, very happy to do so. So from that small beginning, we started to do one or two things over the years. We grew in numbers. We continued to trade vegetable oils from around the world. But then I realized that we needed to perhaps add a little bit more value. And we set up a packing and blending plant in Bedale. And I borrowed my first funds to do so, which is a story within itself, because it was not easy at that time to borrow money as a business in the 80s, certainly not at a reasonable rate. I borrowed my first £10,000 at when the base rate was 17%, and I borrowed at 3% over. So it was a tough beginning, so to speak. Well, we developed a little factory, and we got a reputation for actually doing things that the big boys couldn't do. Small runs of fancy blends for chocolate manufacturers and crisp manufacturers who only wanted 3 or 5 tons. Very, very specialist in that. And the business grew and it prospered. There are all things that happened throughout that journey, lots of different things. We had a fire which taught us a great lesson and certainly cost us money. We went through the machinations of Black Wednesday, when I learned a really basic business rule. If you're going to take risks, which you have to do in business, always be sure that you manage them well and that you have a policy in place to do so. Black Wednesday cost us a lot of money. We nearly went to the edge, but we were able to pull it round. We did things like win 1 or 2 awards as a family business. And my wife and I really had a good but very hard, long hours time out of it in those first 10, 15 years. We bought our own offices. We started to employ more people, and we formed a group of companies, which were divided down into 3 divisions. One was the bulk trading side, which traded anything in a road tanker to a ship size. One was a packed and blended development, which, as I've said, we started in Bedale. And the third and new and exciting and sexy side of the business was in the specialty oils, where we decided to start to bring seeds in. So we'd crush raspberry seeds, blackberry seeds, celery seeds, watermelon seeds, and we'd extract the oil from it. In the early days, in a very, very crude manner, but as we learned more about it, became more sophisticated. And in the end, we actually became the largest processor, and this is one of my big claims to fame, sorry folks, one of the largest processor of fruit seed oils in Europe, would you believe, based in the wonderful port of Goole. So over the years, we had many tribulations, but we had many positives, out of it. And I think one of the positives out of it was when the kids decided to come into the business. Elizabeth and I were a first generation, obviously. The business was growing. My son had just come out of university. And in 2007, he said to me, "Father, I want to come into the business. You've got a graduate program. You employ one or two graduates each year. Can I come on that program?" And I said, "Yes, you can. But you're only going to come on it if you come on it on the same basis as all those other graduates that we've had and employed." And so began a journey for Tom in 2007. And I sent him to other family businesses that I know as firstly part of his inauguration into it. One was a particular business which he enjoyed, where he went for 2 weeks to father and son who'd built quite a large brewery. And I've got to say, I'm not so sure how much work was actually done or how much was learnt, or I know a considerable amount of testing of ale was done. But he built up a good basis for coming into our business from that. And I fast realised that his real speciality was selling. He wasn't bothered about managing, about HR, about anything else. He could sell coals to Newcastle. And so Tom ended up selling specialty oils. And when we sold the business in 2015, he was still there doing that and had built quite a sizable division. And then in 2009, my daughter joined, a completely different kettle of fish. A real driver, a passionate kind of person, a person who was really, I think, a natural leader, and some say a chip off the old block. My eldest daughter, she'd gone to work for an American bank in the city and learned quite a lot very quickly about business. And she came back up because, again, the law of wonderful God's place, Yorkshire, was too much. She wanted to come back, and she came into the business. And ultimately, she went all the way around the different divisions, learned a lot about it. She could speak fluent Spanish. So one of the first things that she did was get involved in our olive oil business, get out there on the olive oil groves, looking at olives, looking at olive oil for us. And then in 2013, my youngest daughter joined, Eleanor. She had an experience in retail with Crew and with Bowden as a buyer, and a very successful buyer. And we pulled in on her experience when she came back to Yorkshire and was newly married, and put her into our supply chain. The thing that I learned from all this experience was this, that the family meetings we started with Tom, when Tom first came in the business in 2007, with just Elizabeth, myself and him, were a very, very important way of communication. Were a very, very important way of communicating. And indeed, even when the girls weren't in the business, they would come along and we'd sit and we'd have supper or a lunch and not be disturbed, and talk about where we wanted the business to go and what mother and father had or hadn't got. So the wills were put on the table quite openly and honestly, so that they all knew what we wanted our future to be once we'd departed this earth. When all three were in the business from 2013, those meetings became 6 a year, once every 2 months, more and more with a formalized agenda and minutes, but still in a fairly relaxed mode where we talk about where we were going and what we were going to do. Each kid received 5% shareholding for obvious tax reasons. But at that stage, we had no intentions whatsoever of selling the business. It wasn't even there. We were on a growth pattern at that stage, and making big inroads and becoming a real name within the wonderful world of veg oils. But then at one fateful dinner I had with a supplier in Paris after a trade dinner, where I can remember the Armagnac was particularly good, and perhaps particularly too good. The chief executive leaned over to me and said, "David, have you ever thought about selling the business?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we've had approaches before," which was true. But no, I'd got a family involved in the business, and we were doing well. We were very profitable. We were growing. We've got good people around us. But, I'd never ever say no. Came back home, mentioned the conversation to Elizabeth, mentioned 1 or 2 figures that he'd thrown at me, which I did not comment upon. And she said, "What are you waiting for? We've worked very hard. We've drafted hard all these years. It's been 30 years of heartache at times. We need to discuss it." And we discussed it openly and honestly with the kids. And the kids all said to us, "Mother, father, you started with note. You've got to where you have. This is a big, huge opportunity. Don't necessarily keep the business for our sakes. We can go on and do other things. We really think that you should look at discussing this further." And so with that, I probably went through 8 months of the toughest part ever of my life in selling the business, marketing it, first of all, confidentially, receiving 19, 20 interests for it, getting 5 bids for it, and going through the process. And you're going to say to me, "Well, at the end of the day, David, when that day in August 2016 occurred, how did I feel? I felt very sad. I felt physically and mentally, if you pardon the expression, knackered. But I did feel sad. And I do, to a certain extent now, feel sad when I go up and down the motorway in a car and I see a Kerfoot Group truck and I think, that's a little, or that road tanker of ours, that's a little bit dirty. I would normally be getting onto our logistics team, ringing them and saying, tanker 17 there, where's he going? Oh, he's going down to Mars at Slough. He's too dirty, get him into a cleaning station. You know, that kind of affinity to the business is still there. And I do miss that. But I'm very proud that my kids, once they're out of their covenanted agreements, they started up in a really niche market that we had not exploited as a group before, which in 2.5 years they have done incredibly, in having 3 industrial units, processing units in Ripon, in just opening a new factory in Poland because of the Brexit issue, employing 60 people, in getting sales up to 15 million, exporting to 50 countries. An amazing effort. So I'm very proud of them that way. In the end, we've got a turnover of 100 million, employed towards 200 people, had an operation in America, had an operation in Poland, and 3 sites in the Port of Gull. And had accomplished one of my dreams that I'd written down in a business plan 20 years earlier, which said I wanted to achieve and have and build my own tank farm in a port and bring raw materials in and export finished products in shiploads. And I managed to achieve that. So that was all good. But what had I learned from this experience? What did that experience of building a family business, and only 2 generations, you'll say, and then selling it, what has it taught me about family businesses? Well, I'll tell you what it's taught me. The first thing is that the employees and how you treat them are absolutely imperative. It's so important that you make those people feel part of the team. And I know from all the family businesses that I come across, that really is prevalent. It's one of the strengths of family businesses, that people, even though they're not blood related, are key members of that team, whether management or shop floor. And I've seen countless examples of that. And I think that's what absolutely contributes hugely to the success of family business. Secondly, it's the values. It's the culture and the philosophy that family businesses create. You know, those of honesty and integrity. And it's shown by the leadership within those families. I'd like to think that our business, you know, and all the others on this line now today, you know, are showing that kind of leadership in honesty and integrity and the way they conduct themselves. Because I think that reflects all the way down the business, right down to the shop floor. And it gives real strength to that business. And thirdly, I think it's really important in family businesses that they show powers to delegate and to empower people. Even though a person might not be part of that family, they are part of it in a way in that they're given true responsibility to take decisions. I know that's a real difficult one for some people. For me, I have to say, it was easier, and I made mistakes on it. But my goodness, I could not have grown the business the size that it grew, you know, if I hadn't have been able to do that. And finally, I was lucky that I started the business in a back bedroom in Morton-on-Swale in North Yorkshire. And that Yorkshire bit is important. And Paul, you touched upon it. Because I think up here, as I think in other parts of our Celtic lands, and I include Ireland, Scotland, Cornwall, you know, all Wales, all in this, that there is something built within us. It's a true spirit of resilience, can do, we will roll our sleeves up and get on with the job. And I think that has really helped me greatly to do what I've done. And finally, because my time now is up, I want to say this. I always believed, and I see countless and countless examples, and there are several on the phone today, I know, who do this, that once they've built that business, and whether they're still in it or they've sold it, their mission is to give back to their community in region in whatever way they can. I feel a responsibility that Yorkshire has been good to me. So it's now my job, my duty, my honour to be able to give back in whatever way I can. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish now, and have tried to over the last 10, 15 years, but now I've got more time, I'm doing that. So I'd like to say thank you very, very much for listening to me this morning. And I'd like to wish you really every success in your future endeavours. I'm not trying to advertise it, but if you like a copy of my book, it's free. Please take it, have a laugh at many of the mistakes that I made, but hopefully we learnt from. Good luck in your endeavours, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. That was amazing, as we knew it would be. And I'd like just to add as well, actually, I know you're currently the High Sheriff of Northwest Yorkshire. You're also part of the LEP. So in terms of giving back to the broader community, I know you do that every day. So thank you for that, because actually it's really important, I think, that we share these stories and we share our learnings, and actually being able to talk about our mistakes helps others achieve good things. A couple of things I'd just like to pick up on. I couldn't agree with you more, and there are some questions coming in that we'll do later in terms of the role of employers in building that culture and helping it, and how they're important. And I think in the past year in particular, with what we've been through, we've seen non-family members and employees of all levels really step up and support the family firms that they work for and have done for generations. So I think you're right, the employers are really important. I also love the book, because actually I think it's really important that some of the learnings that we've had on our own journeys get documented and shared, because otherwise they get lost. So I will happily share that after the event, and anyone that wants it, they can get in touch and we'll happily share the book for them to make sure they get it. You've been a star and a great start to the session. I know you have to go, but you're coming back a bit later on. So we look forward to some questions with you a bit later on, but for getting the day up and running, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I just want to say that without our fabulous sponsors and supporters, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So just a big shout out really to our core national partners, Mattioli Woods, Vistage, Western Pension Solutions, Recognised Bank and Bang & Global, all of whom understand the sector and really help us in doing what we do. I'd like to move on now and actually want to build on some of the things that I think David was referring to in terms of purpose, passion, pride, values, and introduce Fergus Bailie, who is the Managing Director of the Bailie Group. Just rebranded, refreshed, new identity, going places, winning some contracts, a quite positive story, Fergus. So maybe to start by telling us all a little bit about what you do and who you are. And people are going to be a bit surprised. You sound Northern Irish if you're from Northern Ireland, but you're living in Yorkshire. So let's deal with the Yorkshire bit, but also take a bit of the heritage first, and let's move to telling us a little bit about your story.
That's right. Yes, thank you. It's usually helpful in times like this if you have some kind of automated subtitles, but I'm sure within 20 minutes or so you might get your ears in. There's always a few subtle clues to the Irishness behind me as well. But yes, I've lived in Yorkshire now for 12 years. So I haven't been in England now for kind of 20 years. Yes, so I'm Fergus, delighted to be here. Thanks to David, that was a great story. Always really interesting to hear about other businesses and how they do it. So the Bailie Group is a collection of agencies and consultancies specialising in the communication sector. So we've got a variety of brands underneath the Bailie Group, which is a holding company. So we've got CDS, which is based out of Leeds, and it's a communications agency and consultancy specialising in digital transformation projects, creative and print management aspects as well. We have an engineering consultancy, CDS Defence and Security, specialising in defence and security applications and solutions with everything from cyber security to training and unconscious bias awareness. And we have a PR agency within the group specialising in the automotive sector. But although the brands are different, what's at the heart of the group is helping customers kind of maximize their value from content and knowledge. So we help organizations either create content, aggregate and distribute content with an aim to get the right message to the right person at the right time, to take a specific action. And then we've got a range of services and ways in which we cut that. We're currently about 45 million turnover, about 350 employees. The majority of which are in the UK, but we've got some employees who work out in Cyprus, on UK MOD projects, and we've got a couple of employees in Europe and America with various branches that we've got across there.
That kind of was why I didn't do the intro, because I knew I wouldn't get it completely right, to be fair, Fergus. It's a diversified group doing lots of really good things. But let's take us back to how it all started back in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I guess so the group started with my father. So Roy Bailie, he left school at 16 back in the kind of early 1960s. And he left school kind of no qualifications, and he joined a printing company at the time. And his first job was a compositor of hot metal. So at the time, printing plates were all done by hand. You had to lay out all the lettering, all the spacing by hand. And to this day, he still claims he wasn't very good at that because he's still got 10 fingers on his hand. Most people that work in the composition department are sans digits somewhere along the way. So he did that for a couple of years, and then he worked into the sales team. And he began a process whereby he started working on accounts, and then he worked in sales. And the printing company that he worked for was called W&G Baird. And they were actually owned by the British Printing Corporation, which went on to be owned by Robert Maxwell. People will remember that story. So this was in the pre-Maxwell days, but it was part of a larger group. And there was one Friday when the sales director was fired, and on the Monday morning, my dad, in what he would refer to as strategic ingenuity, and other people would call barefaced cheek, he sat in the sales director's seat on the Monday morning, and everybody just assumed that he'd been appointed as the new sales director from the group, and therefore, lo and behold, he became the new sales director. Worked his way through, and then he became, after a few years of doing that, he became the general manager of the printing company. And this was now in the early 1970s. So those of you who are history aficionados will remember that that was a fairly turbulent time in Northern Ireland, right as the Troubles were really ramping up and escalating within Northern Ireland. So my dad and my mum were out at a dinner dance on a Friday night. In the weird kind of incestuous way that Northern Ireland works, they were out with my now father-in-law and mother-in-law, even though Kate and I kind of met independently. And he got a phone call the next day saying, you might want to come in, there's a bit of a problem with the factory. And there was a problem, the factory had been blown up. So it was complete rubble. It had been blown up with 50 pounds of gelignite during the peak of the Troubles, and it was targeted because it was part of the British Printing Corporation, and therefore was deemed to be a legitimate target back in the day. So kind of left with no factory and no printing presses, no mechanisms behind that. He basically kind of begged, borrowed, and stole, got porta-cabins, printing presses, worked with Northern Ireland Investment to rebuild the site out in Antrim. So it meant moving all the workers out of Belfast in a time when there was no public transport, rebuilding the factory, reorganizing the kind of means of production to deliver the same contracts. So that was done really effectively and well. And for a couple of years, the printing company, as it was a single printing company, re-stabilized. Round about then, there's an evolving pattern that my dad kind of gets bored after a couple of years of doing the same thing. And he decided then that there must be more to life than running a single printing company in Belfast. And he then went to the BPC and said, would you sell me this company? And I think at the time they had probably had their fill of dealing with, crazy paddies in the peak of the Troubles. And they sold him the company, and that began the kind of family ownership of the group. And at that time, like as I say, it was a single printing company specializing in magazines and book printing in Belfast. He then brought a team in around him, and their strategy over the next 15 years was to acquire profitable printing groups, profitable printing companies within groups that were struggling, and started to acquire different printing companies and packaging companies across the UK. So we acquired a company in Thanet, one in Margate, packaging company in Belfast. And at the time, the group kind of built up organically, each company specializing in a different type of printer packaging production. each run by an MD and an operating board, but kind of controlled simply by what became the Baird Group, named after W&G Baird. And it was kind of 100% family owned and employed. That then kind of evolved through to really the late 1990s, where technology was changing, the internet had come online, people were using that more in a day-to-day capacity. And what that meant was it created an imbalance in the print market in terms of people were much more able to source different printing products from different suppliers. There was overcapacity in the marketplace. So that meant that prices and margins were coming down. Print machines were very expensive. You know, to buy a new color Heidelberg press was £2-3 million, very disruptive to embed it in. And we took that look and thought that this is going to be the way in which the print industry is going to become ever more competitive with the excess capacity in the marketplace. Margins were coming down. And the decision was taken at that time to then, over the next 10 years, to move out of kind of core print manufacturing, large volume litho print, and to move into the professional services space. So that took a bit of time, because if you imagine you're going from one range of services to a completely new range of services. So the first step in that was to target a company called CDS, which is still in the group now. And the main part of CDS was print management at that time. So they were working with large scale public sector organizations to consolidate their print needs. They had a large roster of suppliers. They would then kind of auction the work, if you like, to go out to multiple suppliers, get best price, manage that process through. And again, that was partly causing pressure on prices within the industry. So by buying that, it was a step into the world that we still knew and understood. We understood the mechanics of working with customers and suppliers, but we were now back re-engaging with the suppliers and the customers directly. So that was acquisition number one. We then acquired CDS Technical Publications in Cheltenham, which was really all around creating green and white papers and technical documentation for the MOD. And the idea with that was it consolidated in with what CDS were doing and writing green and white papers for the Department of Work and Pensions and writing instructional manuals. And that then led us on a path of acquiring professional services companies, which specialized in content and data. So helping either create, gather, or distribute content on behalf of customers. And we sold off the printing companies over the next 10 years.
A really entrepreneurial father, obviously, in terms of what he was doing, an insight in terms of building something. How did you get involved? What are your early memories in terms of the business, and then what drove you to want to get involved as the second generation stepping into the fold?
Yeah, it was interesting because listening to David's story, it was a different approach in that. Myself and I have a sister who's not involved directly in the family, but is a shareholder. I think I'd always been interested in what my dad did. But at an early age, and even going to university, it wasn't on my radar to go and work directly for him. I did a law degree in Durham, which when I moved to England. And then I went and worked for PwC for 5 years. So I got my chartered accountancy qualification, spent a bit of time in M&A. And I got really interested in business through that process. And at that time, the group had just started its process of divesting itself of print. And I think that there were two things happened. One was that I became interested in the idea of joining the family business because I knew I had a passion for working with businesses. Working in PwC, I got a fantastic bedrock of working across different sectors, different businesses from an audit perspective or mergers and acquisitions. And I loved the diversity of what I saw, and I knew I wanted to work in a diverse range of industries. And I also knew I had an opportunity that probably, was too good to pass down, that I could join this family business at the point at which it was changing its identity. Mm-hmm. I think, being honest, had we remained a group of printing companies, I'm not sure I would have been that interested in coming into it. And I think also there would have been real barriers to me coming in. My dad was a very well-known industry expert in that field, and the shadow would have loomed quite large, I think. And in a way, coming in when I did gave me the opportunity to move around all the different aspects of the group. So a bit like David was saying, you know, with his daughter coming in, I worked right across the group, started in project management, worked in the IT division, worked in the print division, worked in the defense division, and then joined the finance team. But it was a point at which the group identity was changing. We knew what we didn't want to be, but we weren't yet clear in terms of what we did want to be. And coming in at that stage meant that I had an opportunity to kind of put my influence on where the group was going to go and what that was going to do. And I knew that I would have the support from my dad and his experience in everything that he'd done in building the group for 30, 35 years. But I wouldn't feel like I had to be my dad plus one.
Yeah.
So I was very clear that if I came in, I wanted to be the best person to take over the business. I didn't want to take over because I was, you know, junior coming in. So, you know, I had a law degree behind me. I'd worked in M&A. I'd got a chartered accountant qualification. I worked hard to kind of distinguish myself academically and also from a background point of view. And then also spent some hard years going into the group to understand from the bottom up what that meant in terms of the way the market was going, the way the customers were going. And when I took over as MD of one of the first companies in the group, I don't know whether or not it was good timing or bad timing, but I took over just as the first recession hit in kind of 2009-10. I'd just become a dad at the time. The Conservative government came in, and at the time, our biggest customer base was public sector communications, and all of that stopped. So being a new dad, being an MD for the first time and dealing with this, I used to have hair. You know, I had all sorts of things before that bombshell hit. But in a way, it allowed me to make a stamp on the company and to make changes that I probably wouldn't have had the confidence to have made quite as early on in the role. You know, the company I took over, CDS, had been born out of the civil service. It had quite a civil service culture and mentality to it. It was quite hierarchical. It was quite old-fashioned. Although it was doing some new and interesting technology, the culture wasn't quite where it needed to be a dynamic leading organization. So it allowed me to make some changes early doors and to take the company and the group in a direction that I thought was different to the past, but still aligned to the heritage and knowledge of what we wanted to do and achieve. And so taking over as MD of CDS, I did that for about 4 or 5 years. We were turning over 25 million at the time. We're kind of growing that now to 45 million. But the biggest challenge I then had was identity of the group and where we wanted to go and position ourselves in the future. And we were quite confused. We'd grown organically over a couple of years. We had companies, you know, I always remember within CDS at one stage, we had different divisions. We had a print management division, we had an internet services division, we had a creative division, and we had a defense division. And the defense division was offering something that was clearly different from a communications perspective. I mean, I remember we used to have this carousel that had the range of services that we would offer, and one would be a great branding piece that we'd just done for the Joint Natural Conservation Committee. And then it would rotate to a soldier, you know, with a rifle, and we'd just done some training work for the MOD. I'm like, I don't really know who we're trying to attract here, but I'm pretty sure it's not either of those two people. And so that then led us to the point at which we had to make a decision about what do we want to be as a group in the future, and how do we want the family dimension to play into that. And when I looked across what we were doing as a group, we were doing a huge array of services. You know, we had people who were monitoring satellite ground stations. We have software developers, database engineers, print management people. We still had a small print production facility. We had PR capability. And for the first 3 years, I tried to be all things to all people and an expert in everything. And I came to the realization that I was kind of the bottleneck to growth. And also I needed to surround myself with people who were the experts in what they did and empower them. And that was what my dad had done, but in a different context. He built a printing group and split them into autonomous bodies that were given authority to grow and develop. And that was kind of what I had to do. I had to learn from the heritage and the expertise and the guidance I got behind me, but to create my own path. And that was when we decided to structure the group in such a way that we became an entrepreneurial group of collaborative specialists. So we split the group into different operating companies. Each one had its own brand. Each one had its own identity, its own culture. You know, the defense business is mainly, or a lot of them are ex-MOD or ex-Army, ex-Navy people. That's a very different culture to an agency based out of Leeds that's got software developers, creative consultants, database engineers. It's a more dynamic, useful culture than maybe a more hierarchical culture elsewhere in the group. So we brought in MDs beneath me, to run the company and to shape the plan. So really, we now see the group role as being guidance and creating a framework to allow people to succeed. So we provide the shared services functions, the HR, the payroll, the IT, so that the MDs don't have to worry about that. And we brought in people who are specialists in communications or defense consultancy or PR, and we kind of allow them to fly. We build a 3-year strategic framework with them. And within that, they've got autonomy to grow and develop.
That's really interesting for me. Sorry, Fergus. It's really interesting for me that you've done that, because almost you've taken the same approach in a way that your father took. So you've learned and come in and created a similar sort of structure based on values and purpose that you've got, and you've incorporated your heritage into that too. Do you think that coming in, I know you're based in Leeds, and your father's now still lives over in Northern Ireland, so you've now taken over that lead role, haven't you, the managing director of the group? So how did that happen in terms of succession? Was it a foregone conclusion? Did you plan that process, or is it just happened? And how have you managed to create the respect of the people around you? You talked early on about not wanting to be dad number 2 or dad plus 1. What did you do to just develop the right skills so you earn that respect and you were allowed to do then what you want to do, both from your father's perspective, but also from the team around you?
I think a big part of it is about, so for me, there's an element of fortune in it, and I think geography helps us a little bit. The majority of the group is run in England now, so that's the reason I'm here, headquartered out of Leeds in Yorkshire. So we're not both in the same office. You know, I think my dad had seen family businesses that didn't work particularly well, where the handover from generation to generation is tokenistic. Sorry, I just locked my machine there. Presume you can still see me.
You're still there, keep going.
Sorry, yes, I talked my computer to sleep. So there were family businesses that he'd worked with where when the father passed to the next generation, he didn't really depart. You know, he was still in the same office. He would still sit in meetings. And if he didn't like what would happen, you know, you could see a power struggle. If you didn't like what was being said over here, you look over here, and he would either give a nod or a shake of the head. And I think my dad was always really keen to avoid that. I was keen to avoid it from a personal perspective. So given that there was a bit of geography segmentation, and also that we weren't a printing group anymore, so people weren't really looking to my dad for the answer as to what we should do. We were looking collectively to what we should do, because we were bringing in the people who were the experts to allow us to drive it. In terms of me earning my stripes, I think part of what I wanted to do, and I think I mentioned it earlier, was I wanted to come in with a strong background and foundation. So I wanted to come in armed with a good understanding of law, of accountancy, of other businesses. I mean, being brutal, my dad said to me, you know, working at PwC, he said, you can have a go messing up somebody else's business before you have a crack at mine. And I think there was an understanding that I wanted a degree of a bedrock and understanding. Yeah. Then I came in, and I didn't come in at a leadership level. I came in as a project manager. So I had to work on projects, and I earned my stripes on projects. I brought new processes to the group. I brought KPIs to the group. And then when I took over the finance team, I changed the way in which that was delivered with a background. But I think luck helped as well, because I think coming in when the recession happened, I think it would have been very difficult for me to come in and make the sweeping changes I thought maybe needed to be happening. I was 30 when I took over. I'm not sure I would have had the confidence to have made some of the changes that I wanted to make as quickly as I wanted to make without the kind of fabric of the changes in the community. I mean, one of the things that my dad always said to me was, nothing ever changes until there's a crisis. And if you ever say to him, well, what if there's no crisis? He says, well, create one. And that was true. So by going in and, when I took over, we'd lost £250,000 in the first 3 months before I took over. So being able to save the company, transform the group, make the changes, and then start the path to growth, I kind of stabilized the group, and we grew it from, say, 25 to 35 million. And then I think the next stage was, you've got to absolutely be yourself and be true to who you are, not who other people want you to be, or try to replicate what's come before you. So I think I didn't try to be my dad, Mark II. And I didn't try to be anything that I wasn't. But I think a period of self-reflection led me to, I worked so hard for those first 3 years to get everybody's respect, and also to make the positive difference that I wanted to make. But that comes at a cost, and it also comes at a point of realizing that you can't do everything, and you will only get to a certain size if everything has to channel through you. So the next part, and I think probably what gained me more respect, was doing less, and actually saying, do you know what? I don't know. I don't know what the best path is here. I don't know the best way to do things, but I'm going to bring in people who do. And then the next challenge is letting them get on and do it. And that can be difficult. That can be difficult for a generational point of view from handing over, but also from an owner-managed point of view, allowing people that freedom. But it became very clear to me very quickly that they knew a lot more than I did, and they were a lot better than I am. So why would I kind of bring people in and empower them to do it, and then not let them get onto it? An interesting family dynamic to that is bringing in MDs to a family-owned business can be a bit of a challenge. There's often an equity stake question that comes in. So often MDs coming in will want an equity stake, and that's not really applicable within our family structure, because we've got people, family members who aren't active in the business and shareholders. So we constructed long-term incentive plans around that to support and reward growth for the MDs. So almost like, if you like, shadow share schemes.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect is, I think MDs voiced a lot of concern coming in that would decisions be taken around the Sunday dinner table? Are they really going to have an impact in the family group? Or, do we all, work on a Monday to Friday, and then, you go around, have dinner on a Saturday, Sunday, and undermine everything that they've done and achieved? So I think the geography of our group helped separate that, because, unless he's going to mail me a roast over on a Sunday, that doesn't happen quite as regularly. But I think family businesses have to be aware that if they're bringing in top leadership into the group, they are valid concerns that people will have, and you've got to give them the space in which to operate.
I think that's very true, and actually that's a topic we're going to come on to when we speak to Jason in a moment, actually, as the non-managing director of a family firm. So I think it's fascinating the way you've come in and you've done what you've done, and I think you're right. I think geography probably has played a part, but the challenges you allude to and talk about are quite commonly seen in family firms across the whole of the country, to be fair, and probably around the world. What's the plan for the future? Just to wrap up for now, and then we'll come back to some questions later, because I know there are questions coming in. What's the plan? So you've taken over, you've grown, you've restructured, you've rebranded. What's the plan for the next 5 to 10 years?
So it's continued growth, hopefully. So we're starting a process now of looking at the next 3 to 5 years. So the way we see the group evolving and developing is acquisition and then reinvestment back into the group company. So we've created an innovation fund this year. So we're developing a fund of about £500,000 to reinvest back into group companies on core innovation projects to deliver service capability. We then also look at new sectors and service diversification within the group companies. Over the last 2 years, we've made strategic acquisitions that have bolted into existing group companies. We bought a company last year called Simple Usability, which has added behavioral insight and user experience into CDS. We made one before that, which was a PR agency into the automotive space. So we're looking at future acquisition and growth into that capability. We're also then looking at external acquisition of commercial property, where we've got an interest, as well as commercial investment into a fourth operating company. And I got this belief that the rule of 4 applies a lot in our business for stability. And at the minute, we've got 3 different trading companies, and we'd like a fourth in a different sector that provides us with a degree of stability. Mm-hmm. There's no exit plan on the cards, but fundamentally, we want to grow organically and by acquisition through different service offerings and revenue moving into different sectors.
So there's a lot on the table. One quote I just like to end with, and I know I wrote an article about you earlier on this year, but something you said you learned from your father is that in a challenging time, and I guess we're living through some challenging times at the moment, is nothing is as good as it seems and nothing is as bad as it looks. And it's kind of the mantra that you live by, isn't it? You're thinking positive, you're investing, you're looking to the future and actually seeing opportunity out there.
Yeah, I think it was something we talked about last year. I mean, obviously everybody's world changed on March 23rd last year when lockdown happened. And, you know, I remember looking out in the first 6 months of the year, and we didn't know how bad it would be or what would happen. We had no idea with public sector contracts or private sector contracts what would happen with that. So there was a degree of trepidation moving into that. And I think we did what most businesses did, and we certainly for the first 2 months really looked after and protected cash. But when we realized that the impact could be softened by some of the projects, we took a decision to invest quite heavily from the midpoint last year on sales and marketing and branding. We recognized that it was probably going to be 6 to 9 months before some of the growth returned. But we wanted to be in a position where when it did return, we were running rather than waiting to see what happened and then start to invest ahead of it. So we rebranded some of the operating companies. We invested heavily in lead generation and marketing campaigns, thought leadership, to kind of build the pipeline so that when customers were ready to invest, we'd be there to help them with that in their communication strategy. Because the one thing that we know from all the different parts of our group is communication is still absolutely critical. Be that online or offline, there's still an absolute need for clarity of your proposition and what you want people to do. Be that customers, be it stakeholders, be it people in your borough or your ward or your council. Government needs to communicate, local authorities need to communicate, businesses need to communicate. And the way in which they do that will change. It used to be print was the only method of communication. Now it's very much a blended approach of print and online and offline technology. So we're of a mindset now to be agile in response to opportunities as we see them come up. And we're kind of determined to make our own, you know, if there's no wind, you row. So if we can see opportunities and we can make our own momentum, we'll try really hard to do that.
Brilliant. Fergus, that's fantastic. I'm going to park you for now, or park you, just pause you. Sorry, that's really rude. Pause you for now. We have got some questions coming in about some of the long-term incentive plans and things. So keep the questions coming in, and we'll deal with all the questions towards the end, and we can have a good panel. So Fergus, that's a fascinating second generation insight from you there. And I want to introduce our final speaker this morning, Jason Rockett, who's the Managing Director at Potter Space. Potter Space is a family-owned business with 5 business parks across the UK, and many of you will have heard some of the Potter story in the past through interviews I've done in the past with the previous managing director and also with Derek Potter, the founder. Each of their business parks is connected by road or rail to a major business artery and offers links to our key ports and cities. They're home to over 40 businesses occupying 1.6 million square feet in commercial properties, including warehouse space, factory, offices, and small business lets. And they celebrated their golden anniversary, 50 years of trading, a couple of years ago now. They've now embarked on the next stage of their journey, and I'm delighted to say that Jason Rockett, the Managing Director and non-family business member, is joining us this morning. So Jason, good morning.
Good morning, Paul.
Let's turn the clock back to you growing up, because I know I've just said you're a non-family member in the lead role now. But let's go back to kind of the beginning, and when you start out in life, I think it's quite important. What did you want to do when you grew up?
Much to my parents' disappointment, I wanted to be a professional footballer. They didn't really consider that a proper job, and they wanted me to concentrate on my books. So they always turned around to me and said, "No, you've got to have something to back it up." So I turned around to them and said, "Well, I'll be a professional cricketer then." And again, they turned around and said, "No, we've got to concentrate on something." And I suppose by the time I got to 16, 17, I realised, I thought at the time, I wasn't quite good enough to make the grade. So I decided to look at other options. And the option that came up was actually through a careers office, was property. And I looked into it. I did some careers training, a week doing general practice surveying, a week doing building surveying. And with that, I decided actually that was for me, general practice surveying. I liked being out of the office, meeting people, very much property, very much a people thing, property is. And I felt that was really compatible with my skills at the time. And so I ended up going to Sheffield Polytechnic to do urban land economics.
So sport's still in your blood now, I know, and sport's a big part of your life, but sporting career didn't quite happen. So you moved into property, qualified, and a lot of people would say, actually, if you've taken a sporting career, you should have a backup. So your parents were very wise in terms of their guidance for you. Polytechnic finished. What was the first job? What did you start doing?
I signed, bizarrely enough, I signed as a professional footballer at Rotherham United. In my final year, I played in 2 World Student Games and I got spotted by Rotherham United. I ended up signing. It's probably good timing because my year out was spent in Middlesbrough in 91, 92, which you all know, if we can remember back then, was another recession. And coming out of Polytechnic wasn't a great time for property in 92. So I was very fortunate that I started a career in football, much to my parents' dismay, I must add. So I spent my time at Rotherham United, and then I moved to Scarborough Football Club, where really I started thinking, actually, my parents know best. I'll listen to them, and perhaps I should have a backup plan just in case I get injured or something like that. And that was where I decided. I met a journalist who we were talking about my background in property. And I said, oh, I wouldn't mind being introduced to someone who could, on my days off, in those days you trained a couple of hours a day in football and you had a day off a week. But I thought instead of going down the golf club or in the snooker hall, I think I should have kept my hand in property. And I got introduced to a gentleman called Kevin McCabe of the Scarborough Property Group, a family business. And I went in there to ask him, what should I do? Who should I go and meet? And on that same Friday afternoon, he ended up showing me to a desk upstairs, and I had a part-time job with him.
Fantastic. So you started working. So you aren't new to family businesses per se. You've been involved with one, I know, for a number of years. Then at the start, that role grew, and then you moved away from Yorkshire, didn't you, for a time? Yeah.
So I moved down to. I started off when I finished football. I started off full time in Leeds. Worked in Leeds for a number of years with Scarborough Property Group, or an offshot of them, which was Teesland at the time, doing property management and development. And then I was asked by Kevin to move down to London, and we were just starting to open in the London office at the time and run property development from there. Based in London, but running London, South East and Wales.
They would seem to bolt Wales on somewhere, don't they? So you're enjoying that then, but you're now back in Yorkshire. So you're back in Yorkshire at Potter. So there was at some point you moved. There was a call back. I mean, David talked about it earlier. The lure back to God's own country, I think he referred to it as. What drew you back then to Yorkshire?
Well, it's funny. I'm a southerner, but someone who came up to university in the north and ended up staying in the north. You know, my kids are born in Sheffield. Would have, under the old rules, qualified to play for Yorkshire Cricket Club. But, you know, the drawback was I got offered the CEO job at Sheffield United. Again, it was part owned by the McCabe family. and they wanted to drive the off-field revenues, and so asked me to go back there and run it. And going back to Sheffield, where I live now, was a no-brainer really. And certainly taken over. I wasn't quite sure to go into football on the administration side, but the opportunity was too good to miss, and the opportunity to move back to the north was also too good to be missed.
And that presumably played to your strengths, your passion sport, football. I guess it was almost too good to be true, wasn't it?
It was in many ways, but it's slightly different running a football club than playing for a football club.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
You tend to have 30,000 critics.
I'm sure you've got a few more than 30,000 if you're at Sheffield United, but still. So that was it. That was the next stage of your career, and then the big jump for you now, I guess, is you've obviously left Sheffield United to then pursue a role at Potter Space. So what made you consider moving? What was the trigger for you, and then what made you consider moving to a family business, and then why Potter?
I think there's a little bit in between there where I worked for Gentian Property Development, which is mainly a southern-based company, but I still lived up in Sheffield. I suppose in about 2019, I decided I was running around, living in Sheffield, young family, working in London and Winchester. I wanted to move back up Sheffield, so I started working in the north again with Gentian, and I wasn't looking for anything, but I got approached about the Potter opportunity, Potter Space opportunity, and it was of interest. I started looking into it, and the phenomenal history behind, looking how Derek started off with his grain truck in 1965, how he built up a logistics business, and then to have the foresight to see the change and the need to change for the next generations into a property company. There's a great history there, and that's what I really, the basis of the foundation of the business. And having seen, it was probably an ideal timing for me, in the sense that they were a logistics company with a great foundation that had turned into a property company, a good basis, but we're looking for the next steps. And that's probably where I came in, looking at the opportunity, a big challenge, but a massive opportunity for me to take the business to the next step.
Yeah, I think that I know Derek and the family, and I've known the story it's a fantastic story. And just some of the pictures of seeing Derek out in the yard with the railway track, digging up and replacing a sleeper, probably at the age of 65. I mean, he just doesn't stop, and he's got such passion, but also foresight in terms of restructuring and the governance framework they've put in place to now enable the business to come under the guise of a non-family MD. What do you think makes family businesses like Potter so special?
I think, it goes back to, it's a number of things. People, one of the biggest things is people. Most important thing about business, and that's whether it's customers or whether it's the actual people that work. Family businesses tend to care. They care about the people that work for them, and they care about the customers. A lot of the customers have been certainly with Potter Space for over some 10 years, over 10 years. That builds relationships. One thing I found out through all of my time with Scarborough and the small time I've had with Potter is the importance of relationships and building those relationships with others. So it really is, and also in branded is the values. And we haven't got, there's not an FD sitting in London crossing off, looking at the bottom line and crossing off who should go, who shouldn't go, how do we make more profit. They actually care about the business. They've grown with the business. We just heard from Fergus and David, passionate about their businesses, and that's something you can't replicate in a big corporate business. And it's something I've noticed in when I was at Scarborough, and certainly now working and trying to keep up with Derek at the moment. He's worked on that business. He's still as passionate as ever about it. The first few weeks, he said he walked me around the sites while I was struggling to keep up, and just the amount of effort that has gone into the railway. I'm learning all the time at the present time as well. And
you'll take great joy in that, the fact that a professional footballer couldn't keep up with him running around his own estate. So you've sown a bit of a seed there.
I know there was a smile on his face when I couldn't keep up either, and he kept going, and he wasn't doing it for show either.
No, he's just got energy, and I think that's what we love about family firms, is the energy and drive they have for them. You must have been recruited during lockdown. So how does the recruitment process for a new MD for a family business happen during a global pandemic?
It was interesting. It started in January of last year when I was approached by a recruitment agent to see whether I was interested. I did a bit of research about the company, thought, yes, it's something I'd be interested in, looked at the values of the company and where they were, how they stood, you know, what their ideas for going forward were. Did a lot of research visiting the sites, going around the sites. I did a lot of research before I accepted that, because I don't do things lightly. And then I met the recruitment agent for a meeting. I passed that test. Then I met one of our non-executives in Buntain, who you won't mind me saying is a Dower Scot, who gave me a real grilling. We met in Darlington in the February, and thereafter I obviously passed his test, but thereafter, unfortunately, as we just said, on the 23rd of March last year, we all know it now, it came to a lockdown, and so it was put on hold. It didn't stop me from researching, looking at the company, understanding how it worked, the company, and it only really heightened my interest in that. Or, as I said, I wasn't looking for a new challenge as of yet, but I saw it as a great opportunity and a great challenge. And so once we were able to again, I managed to meet Derek and other non-executives and go through again. Derek showed me around the Ripon site, walked me around the Ripon site. What I was impressed with, again, it's the passion. And also knows everyone. The important thing is about family business, and it was touched on before several times. They just know everyone they care about. They'll stop and talk to people all the time. You know, a walk around the site that would take half an hour takes several hours, because if you care and they're interested in people. And it certainly came across that, the passion of the business. And so certainly, obviously, Derek must have been seeing something in me, but I certainly saw a lot in the business that, you know, I'd have liked to have been part of. And then thereafter, I hadn't finished then, because they obviously take it very seriously. Matthew Lamb, who was here before, was MD for 15 years. And that says a great deal as well. Mm. And you can look through the Potter business, how many people have stayed for so many years. You've got generations, and even looking at Balker, who they sold the logistics company out to, you bump into people who have worked for Derek, who've grown under the business. And that's quite impressive. That's, you know, not all corporates are like, normal corporates are like that. So the final stage of it was I had a presentation to a number of non-executives, to Derek and Claire Potter. Unfortunately, due to COVID, she couldn't join us in person, but it was done by the teams, as we all got used to now. And that was a grilling. That was 2 hours of going through. But again, you know, things that came out of it, you know, certainly for me, I could see the values that they hold true and have evolved over the number of years of a business. You know, so for me, I was fortunate enough to get through all of that process, but it might have been a long process. I think it's probably by August I got appointed. So I don't think many people have started in January an interview process and finished in August and managed to get the job at the same time. So it was an interesting process, and it was a good process because it gave me a chance to really understand the business more, and really understand their core values.
It's really interesting listening to you talk as well about values, because an awful lot of family firms talk about values and they're almost written on the wall, but they're not lived and breathed. And I think there's many of the successful family businesses are the ones that really do live and breathe their own family values, which is what you're talking about. We heard Fergus talking about appointing managing directors within the family firm and the considerations of those managing directors, that they'd have authority and decision-making processes. Do you think, two questions really, do you think that being a non-family MD of a family business is more of a challenge than a non-family firm? And secondly, did you have any reservations because it was a family business, or did everything you liked, it was a slam dunk?
you always wonder, and Fergus touched on it, are the decisions being made around the breakfast or the dinner table? And that's always a concern. But I've been in family business, obviously been in family business before. I do think it's coming in, it is more challenging because you haven't been part of the journey. Mm-hmm. No matter how much I can read the history of the journey, I haven't sat around the table and seen the decisions made. And it's not always easy times with any business. You know, I think any business is challenging, and there's probably some harsh decisions to be made. You know, some businesses who have hard times, you know, have to make harsh decisions about people who have been with them for many years. So I haven't been part of that integral part of the business. But I think it does help that if the business has a family charter, that you can see how it relates to themselves, but also to the executive and what's expected from the executive. Mm. So that's very much key to it. Strong brand values. So when we're making decisions, you're actually thinking integrity, loyalty, quality. You know, so you can base your decision making and base your building of your business on those things that have evolved over time. So you've got good guidelines, and also it's important, which we're evolving at the moment, the new business strategy, the business strategy that everyone buys into, that's for the next 5 to 10 years, but beyond that as well, there's a longevity to it. So if you've got those parameters in, you've got some sort of, I still haven't had that part of the business that I've seen it evolve and seen family members, how they've evolved it and picked up good nuggets like Fergus has from his father, etc. You know, those sort of things they're gold dust really in many ways. I do pick up those, you know, you do pick up those things. I picked them up from elsewhere. I like to think I probably brought things to the business that they haven't got here as well, particularly on the property side and my experience with property across the country.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing, isn't it? And David talked about his son Tom moving away and coming back with new skills. Fergus talks about not wanting to be dad plus one, but actually having his own corporate background to bring and make a difference. And I think actually even as a non-family MD, you have skills from your previous career that you can bring in. So there's pluses and minuses, but in both ways, and it's kind of whatever works best for each business, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. You know, it's you know, and certainly with our business, it changed from logistic companies, and all the skills were logistics at the time. And now we've got a very good team. One of the, you know, another reason for coming to the company, I looked at the team as well here. There's some really good people at Potter, and it's very much evolved over the years under the previous MD into a property company. It's just me taking it to the next level and using my experiences from elsewhere. You know, I've grown departments in family business before. When I was at Scarborough, the London department started and grew the development.
I think it's really, and again, I think you've all touched on it this morning, that the successful family firms that do stand the test of time evolve and have to change. And it's the good governance underneath that change that helps them evolve and become the new business that they need to be to remain current and to continue continue that journey. Jason, that's fantastic. We've got quite a few questions coming in, so I'm just going to open up now to the panel just to deal with them, so that actually we add some even can add a little bit more value to the audience. If you could bear with me 2 seconds. First question that's come in here is, great to hear talk of values in a family business. When looking at succession planning, how are options assessed? Have any of you ever considered things like an employee ownership model or a management buyout? Fergus, is employee ownership, is it something you've ever considered?
We've had the debate. It's not a path we've gone down. I mean, we have, as we exited the printing companies, most of them were MBOs. So they were management buyouts within the team. What we felt was important was ultimately the family wanted to keep control of the business. And there's various complexities around that. That means that employee ownership is complicated. My experience also of acquisitions that we've done are that I'm not convinced that the owners have necessarily got the benefit from the employees' ownership schemes or the employees that they thought they might have gone. So often they get complicated. The route we went down, when certainly we were attracting talent in, was around a long-term incentive plan. And we looked at various models. And one thing we said was, because we are not planning an exit of any of the businesses, none of them are linked to sale, but they're linked to 5-year plans of growth within the business. And in simple terms, we take percentages of the growth achieved and pay those back to the MDs. And some of it is paid in years, some of it's then retained based on milestones being achieved. But if an MD comes in, say, when the company's making £500,000 profit, and his objective is to drive that to £1 million profit, they'll be rewarded as if they were getting a dividend or shares income as a result of that growth. So we didn't really go down the employee assistance route. What we've done more is look at benefits across the group. And we've got a real kind of laser focus on staff engagement and wellness. So we've got a huge variety of schemes and campaigns in terms of motivation, engagement. We talk to people, we do pulse surveys every quarter. We say to people what's important. And interestingly, very rarely do we get back on that employee assistance schemes or we want shares and growth in the business. They want more tangible things that are going to make their either job more interesting, the facilities in which they work better. So we reinvest profit back into group, aligned to making it a better place to work.
Okay, David, you are muted. Did you want to add anything to that question, or can I move on?
I'm quite, all I to say is that I think about 15, 16 years into our journey, we realised that certainly we've got some key managers there who'd been with us for quite a while. And I think one of the positives that we did was actually give them a small shareholding to 3 managers, which eventually, about 20 years old, was extended to 4 of them and was increased because we felt their contribution and loyalty to the business was such that it should be rewarded in that way. And I think one of the most gratifying things for me was that when we came to sell, they got a nice payout, and it was a really good feeling. That's all I'd like to say.
Yeah. No, I hear that quite a lot, actually, to be fair. I'm going to stay with you, David, in terms of the next question. So what would you say are the 3 ingredients for a successful family business?
Can I have 10 or 20?
No.
3.
You can have 5 if you want 5.
I think if you haven't got passion at the top, then you will not succeed in any business. Whether, it's Jason in property or Fergus doing what the extensive range of things that they're doing, they're not successful unless they've got passion at the top, and that passion is reflected all the way through the business. That for me is an absolute key element. So many times I come across businesses where I hate to say the leadership is flat. It's flat. It's like walking into a wall. There's no dynamism. There's no drive. There's no energy. Derek Potter's an exception. I mean, he should have been retired years ago, but he'll probably go on for another 10, 15, 20 years. And it's that kind of passion, I think, that really makes family businesses very special. So that's the first thing. I think I've got to come back to values and relate that to employees. The integrity, the honesty, the type of leadership that is shown and that is reflected all the way through the business. What Jason was talking about there earlier on about the fact that walking around their business took 3-4 hours because the leadership there, the management there knew everybody and wanted to involve everybody, and there was that kind. And I think that is so important to be able to build that and to be able to reflect that honesty, integrity, right from the top. And then I think one other thing is that I would call it sharing the business and sharing in a way. I think so many businesses don't tend to say, well, look, this is our 10-year plan. This is our 15-year plan. They'll share it with the management team, but they don't go down the line so that people are drawn into that. And I think at whatever level to, pull people in like that is so important. Because because it makes them part of that team, feel part of it. And I think they're more willing then to contribute in a positive way. I mean, one great example of that was we built a huge cleaning station to clean containers for the food businesses, and they had to be absolutely spot on. And we had a Polish guy working for us he ended up working for us for 15, 18 years and went virtually to the top with us. And one day, because he'd been reading our vision about extending this cleaning station, he came along to us and said, well, why don't we change the type of fuel that we're fueling the boilers with? And what he was saying was, why don't we fuel it with veg oil? You know, we've got thousands of tons of veg oil around us, you know, and you know, from an environmental point of view, it's a real plus. And we changed, and that was because that guy from the shop floor had been thinking about the business, had understood our plans for that part of the business and bought into it. So I think there's a lot of benefits, but there's many other things I'd like to say, but I'll drop those three in.
Jason, have you got anything you'd like to add? Jason, are you still there? You need to unmute, Jason, sorry.
Sorry, I'm back with you.
Sorry, so have you got anything you'd like to add in terms of what you think the key determinants are for success in a family firm?
I think, again, it's people. Surround yourself with good people. You know, it's bringing the skills that I always think it's bringing in skills that you might not have and identifying gaps that you need to fill. And don't be frightened to bring in people who have more skills than you.
Yeah.
You know, I always find that, you know, if there's an area of weakness, bring someone in who's an expert in it that can drive that part of the business. Don't be frightened that they know a hell of a lot more than yourself in that area. I think that's the key. Businesses, it's especially property, it's a people business. I think all businesses are really. It's about people and relationships.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I wouldn't disagree. I don't think anyone would disagree with you, actually, to be fair. We've got one last question from the floor before we just wrap up this morning. And then in terms of, I'm going to start with you, Fergus, then come to Jason and just finish with David. Your key learnings or your key takeaways from the last 12 months, it's been difficult for many businesses. I've heard luck today from 2 or 3 of you, which the word that actually has been used a lot more in the family business field over the last couple of months in terms of just being lucky to be in the right sector at the right time. Obviously, we know that some businesses out there are struggling because of the restrictions in terms of hospitality and travel, but there are opportunities out there. So your key learnings, I guess, your key learnings briefly from the last 12 months, and I'll start with you, Fergus.
I think it was the clarity of purpose that we always felt was important became absolutely critical. Because one thing that I think attracts people into the group, but also binds us in our collective mission, is that we want to invest in people and ideas that make a positive difference. And when there's a huge amount of uncertainty externally, I think it's welcome to have clarity internally on what you're trying to achieve. And it brings people together so we can celebrate the success stories. So even during the pandemic, we were able to talk about the work that we were doing. We were doing all the tube wraps for TfL. We were doing all the work on the buses. We were working with the Met Police to transfer the digital offering online to Digital 101. We were working with local authorities. We were working with the MOD because our purpose was to make a positive difference. So we were able to rally people together to talk about the importance of what we were doing, why it was important to motivate people, excite people, help people with their mental health challenges remotely, because we could keep bringing them back to what we do really matters. And while there was so much noise externally and so much doom and gloom and pessimism, we were able to engender our own positivity by believing that what we do makes a difference and being able to amplify that. And it was almost like a mindfulness exercise that people could feel empowered and, you know, even if you weren't getting out of your house every day, you were getting up to make a positive difference, and that was critical for us.
Okay, that's fantastic. Key learnings for you, Jason, it's slightly trickier for you because you've only been around in the business for about just under a year now, but key learnings in the last 12 months for you?
Got to be adaptable. You know, one of the things that has proved business has got to be flexible and willing to change. Certainly, even before I got to Potter Space, they were putting in place with COVID, initiatives to stop, just stop, have a look, do we need to spend this money at the present time? We're not quite sure about the certainty. Shall we reserve cash? Things like that you've got to look at and not just keep ploughing on with the business. So it's adapting that business and the business model to take account of the circumstances. And sometimes it helps when you're a smaller business that you can do it. You're a bit more flexible rather than some of these big corporates. They're like all tankers. Another key is, again, it goes back to customers and relationships with them. Talk to them. I know we're fortunate. We're in a good sector, but COVID's touched everyone and Brexit's touched everyone. So, some businesses have been doing even better over the last years, like online retail, but still there's businesses under ourselves that haven't been doing as well. You've got to listen to them and see how you can help them and assist them, because it's a long-term investment. What you don't want to see is, for the sake of agreeing sort of rent holidays or something along those lines, is a business going bust. Because if you can help them out in the short term, I'll tell you what, they'll be with you for the long term. Yeah. And all what I see from family businesses, it's always for the long term as well. And so I certainly think that is probably, it's a listening and communicating. You need to listen and communicate a lot more during these hard times, and understand who your customers are and what they're going through. They're all going through different things. They've all got different, we've just finished a customer survey. We did one first 2 years ago. The feedback is great. It assists us because they know us best and what we're doing well and what we can improve on. So, and again, on the communication side, is listening to your team and your staff and making sure they're okay. Because through these times, you can't underestimate the issues with mental health and well-being as well. And it's ensuring that the people that work with you as well are looked after.
It's so important. And finally, David, your key learnings. I know you're not actively involved in the business now, but in your broader role in the community and family businesses being a force for good, your key reflections really on the last 12 months?
Yeah, and as chair of the York and North Yorkshire LEP, which is the largest LEP of the 37 in the countries region-wise, I've been able to see a lot about what business is doing and their approach to the situation since March, and it's been very interesting, because the first thing I'd like to say is that I think this time has given businesses a chance to plan and to review where they're going, and I think that has made a big difference. They've been able to perhaps, well, obviously trying to keep the business going, sit back and saying, well, are we really going in the right direction? And I've seen quite a lot of that, that come through. I think also the ability to be able to change, to be flexible, to go into new markets, to change your production, etc., has all come through in many different ways to me. The big thing from a LEP point of view, and also from High Sheriff as well, I think that's come through, is this situation of mentality and approach to working at home and well-being. And it's something that we in a LEP have really striven hard to try and help and to put a really as much into that side of our work as possible, because it's going to be key. And I think a lot of businesses have really picked up on that and done some really positive things. And I think that in a lot of ways will, with the way in which we're going to change in the way we approach things and the way we work, and perhaps more working from home, businesses are going to have to become more accomplished in how they assess those individuals and the effect upon them, and their input into the business place. So I think, all those things, are occurring now. I think the big hit, regrettably, is in SMEs. Our region is 97% SMEs, and there has been quite a lot of casualties. But there again, I can tell you endless pluses of where people have turned around and approaching their business in a different way and driving it forward. So while the media tend to work always on and all the media interviews I've done, they're always looking for the negative side of it. You know, I've really tried to think, oh, well, look, think about this business or that business, because they've approached it in a different way, and really positive things happening. If I can just throw in something just at the end, just one sentence, just think about, I think the big ghost in the cupboard coming up to affect businesses and family businesses now is Brexit, without doubt.
And there's a whole new conversation to be had around that, David, to be honest, and I don't think we have time for this morning, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's really important that we do manage to focus on the positives, as you say. There are lots of businesses out there that have been forced to address their digital agenda, made massive changes in terms of the way they do their business. The well-being of staff has come to the fore. And I think the other thing, alluding really back to what Fergus was saying in terms of the next generation, they've had an opportunity to step up, because it's been all hands to the pump in some businesses, and so they've gained a voice quite early on, and they've taken responsibility and authority and made decisions as well. I'd like to thank all three of you for your candor, your honesty, the stories, and just sharing your views on some of the things that lots of other family business owners out there are going through. And actually, the one thing I hear a lot is that family business leaders often feel alone. I spoke to one yesterday that's actually a CEO of a large hotel chain in Scotland, who's actually on furlough and can't run his business because there's nothing for him to do. And just to actually have a conversation was really powerful. So I think, Jason, building on your communication thing, I think it's good to make sure you manage that supply chain, and you do make sure you pick up the phone and talk to people and communicate, because as you say, what goes around comes around. Today is Yorkshire Family Business Day, so there's a lot of activity going to be taking place on social media later today. I'd encourage you all to join in and share pictures of your history, your heritage, your products, get involved in the digital space, and help us make a day to make Yorkshire proud. Thanks again, everybody, for being part of the Yorkshire Family Business Forum. Hopefully, we'll be doing this in person in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, please keep safe and well. And thank you very much for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.